The rain was pouring down hard that night in a small coastal town in the United States. Lightning tore through the dark sky, and the sound of thunder echoed like a cry of agony. Inside an old car parked on the side of a deserted road, a young girl, barely 6 years old, watched the world around her crumble. Her eyes were filled with tears that mixed with the rain running down the window. Outside, her parents argued loudly, oblivious to what their words meant for her. "Please don't leave me here," she pleaded in a trembling voice, but her parents continued to ignore her. Her mother, face marked by exhaustion and bitterness, gave the girl one last glance before stepping back into the car. She left the door open for a moment, as if reconsidering. But the hesitation was brief. The door slammed shut, and the car sped off, disappearing into the wet road. The little girl was left alone, shivering with cold and fear as the storm around her seemed to grow stronger, mirroring the pain and abandonment she felt. Barefoot, she began to walk along the road, seeking shelter or someone who could rescue her from this unforgettable night. Her name was Amelia, and that night, in the midst of the storm, she wondered what she had done wrong to deserve being left behind like that. She was only a child, unable to grasp the complexities of adult decisions, but the abandonment left scars that words could never fully explain. Years went by, and Amelia never heard from her parents again. An elderly couple living on a nearby farm found her and took her in, giving her a loving home. Though they had never had children of their own, they treated Amelia as a daughter of the heart. As she grew, the pain of her past remained, an unanswered question in her soul. She often wondered why she had been abandoned so cruelly, why she hadn't been enough for them to stay. Elsewhere in the same town, a new story was beginning. A young woman named Caroline had just given birth in chaotic conditions. The hospital was crowded, and the medical staff barely managed the urgency of her arrival. Caroline's birth brought a brief sense of relief, but it soon became clear that something deeper was at play within her family. Her parents were tense, avoiding eye contact with anyone. There was something in the air, something unexplainable. Then, the police were called. No one knew why, but the feeling that something was wrong spread like wildfire. Years after Amelia had been abandoned, she was living a quiet life, far from the city where it had all begun. Then, one ordinary day, as she watched the news, a name, Caroline, echoed through the room. The story about the sudden birth and the mystery surrounding the family awoke something in her. There was something familiar about the story, something she couldn't ignore. Gradually, the past started to unfold before her. A name, a face, a faint memory. And suddenly, it all made sense. Caroline was somehow part of her own story, their paths intertwined in ways Amelia could never have imagined. In the days that followed, Amelia decided to return to the city where everything had begun. She knew that something significant was about to be revealed, something that would change her life forever. But she also knew that facing her parents, if they were still alive, would be inevitable, and that encounter would bring long-buried secrets to the surface. The storm that had abandoned her that cold night seemed to be returning, this time metaphorically. Amelia was ready to confront whatever came, but she had no idea that what she was about to discover would be far deeper and darker than the abandonment itself. Amelia never thought she'd return to that town after years of peaceful life on her adoptive parents' farm. The idea of revisiting the place where her life had taken such a tragic turn felt like a distant nightmare. But something about the news unsettled her. She felt an inexplicable connection to the situation, as if the ghosts of her past were calling her back. As the train carried her toward the coastal city, it rattled gently, and the sound of wheels on the rails calmed her, even though her mind was agitated. She gazed out the window, watching the landscape gradually change. Slowly, the tranquil fields of the countryside gave way to the familiar scenery of the town where she had grown up. A wave of nostalgia hit her, mixed with fear and uncertainty. When she stepped off at the station, the rain had started to fall, not a storm like years ago, but fine raindrops that brought painful memories to the surface. She pulled the hood of her coat over her head and began to walk through streets that she barely recognized. Some shops had changed, but many places were the same. She knew exactly where she had to go, the police station. She needed answers. When she arrived, she found the place in chaos. Caroline was at the center of a mysterious investigation, and the details were still vague. Police officers were talking urgently, and Amelia tried to catch something that would make sense. When she finally managed to speak to one of the officers, he was evasive. "It's a delicate case," he said, but he hinted that Caroline's family was involved in something dark. The tension within Amelia grew. She knew she had to learn more. So she began searching for someone who could give her answers. She dug through city records, combed through old files, and asked discreet questions. Caroline's parents' names came up repeatedly, and then a shocking revelation emerged. Caroline's parents were her own biological parents. They had abandoned her on that stormy night years ago. But now, after years of distance, an even bigger secret was coming to light. Amelia felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The pain of abandonment surged back with full force, but now it was mixed with overwhelming confusion. Why had her parents had another daughter? And why was Caroline involved in something so serious that the police were investigating? She continued her investigation, meeting people who had crossed paths with her family in recent years. She discovered that after abandoning her, her parents had faced a series of illegal financial troubles. But there was more. They were also being investigated for something far more serious, an old network of crimes and illicit activities. Caroline was just the tip of an iceberg Amelia could never have imagined. As Amelia tried to piece together the puzzle, an unexpected figure appeared, an old childhood friend, now working as an investigative reporter. Sarah had heard that Amelia was back in town and sought her out, offering her help. They hadn't seen each other since they were children, but the connection between them was instantaneous. Sarah had valuable information about Caroline's family and was willing to share it. In their meetings, more secrets began to surface. Amelia discovered that after abandoning her, her parents had assumed new identities, attempting to escape from a past that included fraud and even more serious crimes. The disappearance of people made Amelia begin to question her own existence. Was she also a pawn in a larger game, something disposable in the eyes of her parents? At the same time, Amelia knew she needed to meet Caroline, to look her sister in the eyes, this sister she'd never known, and to understand what connected them so deeply. But Caroline was under police protection, and gaining access to her was difficult. Through her connections, Sarah managed to arrange a secret meeting between the two. The meeting took place in a discreet cafe on the outskirts of the city. When Amelia finally saw Caroline, it was like looking at a distorted version of herself. There was something familiar in her face, yet also a sadness in her eyes that reminded Amelia of her own inner demons. They sat in silence for a few minutes, until Caroline broke the ice. "You know who I am, don't you?" Caroline asked softly, avoiding eye contact. Amelia could only nod, unable to find the words. "They never spoke of you. Never. But I knew something was wrong, that there was a void in our family. I missed you, even without knowing who you were," Caroline continued, her voice trembling. Amelia couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her sister, the girl born amidst chaos, felt an absence she couldn't even explain. As they exchanged stories and tried to fill in the gaps, it became clear that their biological parents were involved in something far deeper and darker. Caroline knew secrets that could ruin the lives of many people, which was why she was under investigation. Amelia felt the tension mount as more questions surfaced. Now more than ever, Amelia knew that a confrontation with their parents was inevitable. But what she might uncover when she confronted them could change everything. Not only her own story, but also the future of Caroline and what truly happened on that stormy night. The conversation with Caroline still echoed in Amelia's mind as she returned to the small hotel room where she was staying. Outside, the wind blew fiercely, swaying the trees and flickering the street lights in the cold night. The feeling that something was about to change lingered in the air, and Amelia knew she was approaching the moment she'd avoided all her life, reuniting with her biological parents. Amelia looked at herself in the small bathroom mirror, studying her reflection as if searching for answers. How could someone abandon a child and just move on? The question she'd carried since childhood surfaced again, but now there was something deeper. Caroline's words, that their parents had never mentioned Amelia, haunted her. Why so much silence? Why had they never come back for her? The next day, with Sarah's help, Amelia managed to locate her parents' address. They lived in a modest house in a distant neighborhood, far from the curious eyes of the city. The house, worn down by time, reflected the decline of a life that had once known comfort. Now it seemed just a shadow of what it once was. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest as she stood in front of the door, her legs trembling. Her instinct was to turn and run, to flee once again, but something held her in place. She took a deep breath, raised her hand, and knocked on the door. The door opened slowly, and there stood her mother, now an aged and weary woman. The impact was instant. For a brief moment, it felt as though time had stopped. Amelia could hardly believe that this was the woman who had left her so many years ago, and yet, in her mother's eyes, she recognized a pain that mirrored her own. "Amelia," her mother whispered, her voice filled with surprise and a trace of fear. The name, which had seemed forgotten for so long, sounded strange coming from the mouth of the woman who had given her life. Amelia found herself unable to speak. The silence between them was suffocating until her mother took a step back, allowing Amelia to enter. The house was silent, but the air was heavy. As Amelia entered, her father appeared, looking at her with a mix of guilt and relief. We didn't think you'd come back," he said, his voice unsteady. "After so much time, we thought you'd moved on," he continued, his words cutting through. "Amelia, move on," she repeated incredulously. "You left me. I was just a child. How could you expect me to just move on?" Amelia's mother began to cry silently, but her tears did nothing to calm the growing anger within Amelia. She needed answers. "Why did you abandon me? What did I do wrong?" she demanded. Her father lowered his head, and her mother began to tremble. There was a dark secret behind it all, and Amelia was on the verge of discovering it. "It wasn't because we wanted to, Amelia," her mother finally spoke, her voice shaky. "We were forced." "Forced? By who? What does this even mean?" Amelia frowned, searching their faces for clarity. Her father sighed deeply, as if the weight of the world was bearing down on him. "We were involved in dangerous things, things that started long before you were born. And when you came into the world, they gave us a choice. Either you..." He trailed off, as if the words were too heavy to say. The truth unfolded slowly, almost unbelievably. Her parents had been entangled with a criminal group that controlled various illegal operations along the coast. Over the years, they had become involved in fraud and cargo theft until things spiraled out of control. When Amelia was born, the organization feared she could be used against them as a form of leverage, or worse, become a target of their enemies. Abandoning Amelia hadn't simply been an act of cowardice. It was a desperate attempt to protect her. They thought that by leaving her to the world, she would be safer, far from the dangers surrounding them. But instead, their decision left deep scars on all of them. Amelia felt torn. Part of her could understand her parents' fear and desperation. They had made horrible choices, but they weren't heartless monsters. Even so, this didn't erase the pain she had carried her entire life. "You never thought of coming back for me? You never thought I deserved the truth?" "We tried," her mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. "But by then, you were living with another family. We thought it would be better for you to forget us. We were broken." Amelia's anger and sadness mingled, a storm of emotions swirling within her. Everything she had believed about her childhood was turning upside down. Her parents hadn't left her out of disdain, but out of fear. But then, what did Caroline have to do with all of this? With everything swirling in her mind, Amelia struggled to process the revelations. She had asked about Caroline. Why did they have another child after her? And what was happening with her now? The silence that followed was darker than before. Her mother looked at her father, who lowered his head. "Caroline," her mother began hesitantly. "Caroline is different. She wasn't just a second chance for us. She was part of an agreement." Amelia's heart seemed to stop. An agreement? What kind of agreement? She was the guarantee that we would never leave the organization. Caroline was marked from birth, and now they want to use her to complete what they started. Amelia stood abruptly, her head spinning with the flood of information. Her own past was entangled in a danger far greater than she'd ever imagined, and now her sister was at the center of it all. But who were these people who controlled her family's fate? And what did Caroline's future hold? Leaving her parents' house with a shattered heart, the realization that Caroline was part of a dark pact left her in a state of shock. Now, besides bearing the weight of her own past, she knew she had to act quickly to save her sister. The criminal organization controlling her parents was still active, and Caroline's fate hung by a thread. Driving to the police station where Caroline was in custody, Amelia tried to piece everything together. If Caroline was truly a guarantee for the organization, that meant they would use her as leverage, or worse, as a form of retribution. But why? What interest did the organization have in controlling an already broken family? When she arrived at the station, Amelia requested to see Caroline, but the officers hesitated. The situation was delicate. Caroline was involved in a complex investigation, and there were strict orders to limit visits. Yet, after much persistence, and with Yin's help, Amelia finally secured a meeting with her sister. As the two came face to face, a palpable tension filled the air. Caroline looked exhausted, her eyes hollow and her expression lost. Still reeling from the revelations her parents had shared, Amelia sat across from her, struggling to find the right words. But before she could speak, Caroline broke the silence. "I know what they did to you, Amelia," Caroline began softly. "I know everything, and I'm sorry for being part of this." Amelia was bewildered. How could Caroline know so much? "They told me," Caroline continued, her eyes locked onto Amelia's. "It wasn't just an agreement, Amelia. I was created to make the final sacrifice. They left you behind so that I could take your place. They knew one day they'd need someone to settle the debt our parents could never repay. And that person is me." A shiver ran down Amelia's spine. The weight of Caroline's words. The words Caroline was saying were inconceivable. A sacrifice? What kind of sacrifice? Amelia asked, her voice trembling. Caroline took a deep breath, her eyes brimming with tears. "Years ago, our parents made a pact with that organization. They received money, favors, everything they needed to build a life. But in return, they promised something. They promised me. They raised me knowing that at the right moment, I'd have to give myself to them. And now, that moment has come." Amelia could hardly believe what she was hearing. "You can't be serious. This doesn't make any sense. No one can control your life like that." "I have no choice," Caroline replied, her voice wavering. "They're coming for me tonight, and if I don't go, they'll come for you." Amelia felt her blood run cold. This organization, which until now had seemed like a distant, hazy threat, was about to cross the line into something impossible. But Amelia couldn't accept it. She wouldn't lose her sister to a group of criminals who treated her like a simple bargaining chip. "This won't happen," Amelia said resolutely. "I won't lose you to them, just like they lost me years ago. We're leaving here right now." Caroline hesitated, glancing at the door. "You don't understand, Amelia. They've always known where we were. There's no way to escape. If I leave, they'll chase us, and the price will be far greater." But Amelia wasn't giving up. She called Yin, who was outside, and quickly explained the situation. The reporter, who had already heard rumors about the criminal organization, offered her help. Together, they devised a plan. Yin would use her influence to leak the story to local media, while Amelia would take Caroline to a hideout where they could buy time until the police could intervene. The plan was risky, but it was their only chance. Yin managed to spread the story, and within hours, the news was filled with details about the organization. Public pressure on the authorities began to rise. Meanwhile, Amelia and Caroline hid in an old, abandoned barn on the outskirts of the city, hoping it would be safe. But their security was short-lived. In the middle of the night, the headlights of a vehicle lit up the barn, and armed men emerged from the shadows. The organization had found them. "There's no escape," the man at the front said with a cruel smile. "Caroline knows the agreement, and now she has to fulfill the destiny that was set for her." Amelia stepped in front of her sister, her resolve unwavering. "You're not taking her." Caroline took a deep breath, her eyes brimming with tears. It's been years. Our parents made a pact with an organization, receiving money, favors, everything needed to build a life. But the agreement came with a price, a sacrifice, and that's me. I was raised knowing that, at the right moment, I'd have to surrender myself. Amelia could barely process what she was hearing. You can't be serious. This makes no sense, Caroline. No one has the right to control your life like this. They'll come for me tonight, Amelia, Caroline whispered, her voice trembling. If I'm not there, they'll come for you. The blood drained from Amelia's face. The organization that had once felt like a vague, distant threat was now an unavoidable reality. Her mind raced, panic taking over. She wouldn't lose her sister to this. This group that saw Caroline as nothing but a bargaining chip. No, Amelia said, her resolve hardening. I won't let them take you. We're leaving, right now. Caroline's gaze fell to the floor, a glimmer of doubt in her eyes. You don't understand, Amelia. They've always known where we are. There's no way to escape. And if they have to search for me, the consequences will be much worse. But Amelia wasn't willing to surrender. Without hesitation, she reached out to a trusted reporter who had been following rumors about the organization, outlining the dire situation. The reporter, Sarah, immediately agreed to help, devising a desperate plan. She would expose the story to the media and find a safe place where Amelia and Caroline could hide, hoping the authorities would intervene before it was too late. Within hours, the story made headlines, sparking public outrage. Amelia and Caroline were whisked away to an old, abandoned barn on the outskirts of town. They thought they were safe, but safety would prove fleeting. In the dead of night, headlights flooded the barn's shadowy walls, and armed men, a team known as the Shadow Surgeons, surrounded the two sisters. A tall man stepped forward, his eyes cold and unyielding. Caroline, he sneered, you know the agreement. Time to fulfill the destiny that was chosen for you. Amelia stepped between her sister and the men, her voice steady and defiant. I won't allow it, Amelia said firmly. The man sneered, amused. You? Who are you to stop us? This destiny wasn't your choice to make. In a sudden, desperate move, Caroline stepped closer to Amelia, pushing her aside. I won't let them hurt you, she whispered. Before Amelia could react, Caroline turned and ran toward the man, surrendering herself willingly. But at that moment, something completely unexpected happened. A gunshot rang out in the night, echoing through the silence. Yet the bullet wasn't aimed at Caroline. The leader of the organization staggered and fell to the ground, blood seeping from his side. Out of the nearby bushes emerged armed officers, ready for action. Amelia had managed to alert the authorities in time, and they'd set up an ambush at the scene. Within minutes, the organization's men were arrested, and the injured leader was taken into custody. Shocked and shaken, Caroline and Amelia hugged each other tightly, hardly able to believe what had just happened. Days later, as the investigation unfolded, the full extent of the organization's crimes was revealed, including the involvement of their own parents. The sacrifice plan for Caroline would never come to pass. She was free. For Amelia, it was as if the shadow of abandonment that had haunted her had finally lifted. The destinies of the two sisters had intertwined painfully, but in the end, they'd broken the chains that had bound them. Caroline, though now free, knew she'd carry the marks of her past forever. Yet, she also knew she had something she'd never imagined, a sister willing to fight for her. Amelia, for her part, realized that although the past could never be entirely erased, the future was still theirs to rewrite. Musical Notes thank you for following this thrilling, twist-filled story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more captivating and inspiring narratives. Like, share with friends, and leave a comment on what you thought of the story. Be sure to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for being here, and see you in the next story. Musical notes.